Welcome to the History in Focus channel. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss more videos like this one.
Forget everything Hollywood showed you about the Wild West. Clean cowboys, guns that never missed, honorable duels at sunset, and Indians who only existed to lose. All lies. The reality was dirtier, more violent, more unjust, and infinitely more bizarre than anything that ever appeared on a movie screen. Today, you are going to learn shocking truths that Western movies never had the courage to tell. Fact number 1, the most feared outlaws of the Wild West were teenagers. When you think of a Western bandit, you picture a bearded man, hardened with decades of crimes on his back. The truth is quite different. Many of the most famous names on the frontier began their criminal careers before turning 18. They were boys, children in many cases, and the America of that time had no idea what to do with them. Billy the Kid is the most famous example. By 15, he had already committed his first robbery. By 17, he killed for the first time. By 21, he was dead, shot by Pat Garrett in the darkness of a room in Fort Sumner, New Mexico. The official story says he killed 21 men, one for each year of his life. Truth or exaggeration? No one knows for sure. What is known is that he was a skinny kid with crooked teeth and a smile that did not match the list of crimes. Jesse James was not far behind. By 16, he was already riding with Confederate guerrillas during the Civil War, taking part in ambushes and raids. When the war ended, he had no job, no land, and no future. What he had was experience with guns and plenty of rage. By 19, he robbed his first bank. From then on, he did not stop until he took a bullet to the back of the head at 34, fired by a friend who wanted the $10,000 bounty. But what few people talk about is the context behind these boys. The American frontier was a place where children became orphans before the age of 10. Epidemics of cholera, smallpox, and tuberculosis wiped out entire families. Without school, without assistance, without law, the only way out for many was crime. It was not adventure, it was desperation. And America turned these desperate boys into legends because it was easier than admitting the system had abandoned them. John Wesley Hardin killed his first man at 15. Cherokee Bill was hanged at 20. The Dalton brothers started robbing trains before turning 25. Youth was not a mitigating factor on the frontier. It was fuel. Boys with nothing to lose and a gun in hand became the most dangerous men in the territory. And when they died young, turning their short stories into eternal legends. The most disturbing part is that society at the time did not see them as victims. It saw them as entertainment. Newspapers competed with each other to publish the exploits of the young bandits. The younger they were, the more shocking the headline, the more newspapers sold. 19th century America created its own teenage anti-heroes and then pretended to be surprised when they died young. The frontier did not kill only with bullets, it killed with indifference. Fact number 2, cowboys smelled so bad you could not stand being within 10 feet of them. Forget the movie cowboy with a clean shirt, a spotless hat, and a white smile. The real cowboy stank. And it was not just any smell, it was the kind of odor that made horses turn their heads and flies change course. Weeks without bathing, under a scorching sun, mounted all day long. The result was predictable. On a typical cattle drive, which lasted 2 to 4 months, a cowboy wore the same clothes every day. Same wool shirt, same leather pants, same boots that never dried. Sweat accumulated in layers. The dust of the plains stuck to the skin like a second skin. And since bathing was a rare luxury, the rivers were for the horses, not for the men, hygiene simply did not exist. Records from travelers of the time describe the smell of a group of cowboys approaching before they were even spotted. A merchant in Dodge City wrote in his diary that it was possible to identify the arrival of a cattle herd by the odor on the wind, from more than a quarter mile away. When the cowboys finally entered town, the first stop was not the saloon. It was the barber, who, besides cutting hair, sold hot baths for 25 cents. But the problem was not just the lack of bathing. The diet on the trail made everything worse. Beans, black coffee, jerky, and hardtack, a diet that turned the digestive system into a war zone. Veterans of cattle drives reported that the air around the camp at night was nearly unbreathable, not just because of the accumulated sweat, but because of the gas that dozens of men fed on beans produced without any ceremony. Hollywood cut the smell. Reality did not have that luxury. And there were the lice. Infestations were so common that cowboys shaved their entire bodies when they reached a town. Fleas, ticks, and bedbugs were part of daily life. A cowboy in Texas in 1878 wrote to his family saying, He had more company inside his shirt than around the campfire. Life on the trail was not romance. It was brutal survival where dignity was the first thing left behind. Fact number 3. Native Americans had already mastered horses centuries before the first cowboy appeared. Hollywood sold the image of the cowboy as the original horseman of the American West. The historical truth is exactly the opposite. Long before any white cowhand mounted a horse on the plains, the Comanches were already considered the best horsemen on the continent. Horses arrived in North America with the Spanish colonizers in the 16th century. But it was the indigenous nations, especially the Comanche, who turned the animal into an extension of their own body. Children learned to ride before they could walk steadily. By 8 years old, a Comanche boy could already hang off the side of a horse at full gallop, using the animal's body as a shield while firing arrows from beneath the neck. The skill was not showing off. It was military tactics. American soldiers were horrified when facing Comanches in open field. While a soldier took 30 seconds to reload, a Comanche could fire 12 arrows from the back of a galloping horse. The math was brutal. Military reports from the 1840s described the Comanches as the most formidable horsemen any European army had ever faced. What changed the game was not skill. It was technology. Samuel Colt's Colt revolver, patented in 1836, allowed a single man to fire 6 shots without reloading. The Texas Rangers were the first to use this weapon in mounted combat against the Comanches. For the first time, the speed gap between arrows and bullets narrowed. It was not courage that defeated the Comanches. It was the Industrial Revolution mounted in a holster. And here comes the detail no one mentions. Cowboys learned to ride from the Mexicans, who in turn learned from the Spanish, who in turn observed the natives. The saddle, the lasso, the breaking techniques. Everything has its roots in the indigenous and Mexican cultures that America prefers to erase from the books. The American cowboy is a copy that became an original only in propaganda. Fact number 4. Wild West guns were so inaccurate that shootouts looked more like a lottery than a duel. You can forget that movie scene where the hero hits the bandit between the eyes from 160 feet away. In real life, the revolvers of the era missed more than they hit, especially beyond 20 feet. Most shootouts ended with more holes in the walls than in the bodies. The Colt Peacemaker, the most iconic gun of the Wild West, weighed over 2 pounds and had a barrel just under 5 inches long. The sight was rudimentary, a metal nub at the end of the barrel. No rear sight, no recoil compensation. Tests with guns from the era show that at 50 feet, the chance of hitting a man-sized target was less than 50%. At 65 feet, it dropped to less than 30. The most famous shootout in American history proves this. At the gunfight at the OK Corral in Tombstone, Arizona, 1881, 9 men exchanged more than 30 shots at less than 10 feet. It lasted 30 seconds. Result, 3 dead and 3 wounded. Even at point-blank range, nearly half the shots missed. Movie duels are pure fiction. Real shootouts were chaotic, fast, and deeply inaccurate. And there was another problem the movies never show: black powder. Unlike modern ammunition, Wild West guns used gunpowder that produced a dense cloud of white smoke with every shot. After 2 or 3 shots, the shooter could barely see the target. In a gunfight inside a saloon, visibility dropped to 0 in seconds. Men were literally shooting in the dark, guided by sound and luck. The smoke killed the aim before the bullet killed the target. And the famous high noon duels? They almost never happened like in the movies. The vast majority of firearm deaths in the Wild West happened from behind, in ambushes, or with the victim unarmed. Wild Bill Hickok, one of the most feared gunfighters on the frontier, died from a bullet to the back of the head while playing poker. Jesse James was shot in the back while straightening a picture on the wall. The honor of the duel was fiction. The bullet in the back was the rule. Fact number 5. The first Wild West show began before the West was actually tamed. In 1883, while outlaws were still robbing trains and entire territories had neither law nor sheriff, William Buffalo Bill Cody was already selling tickets to his theatrical version of the frontier. The show traveled across America and Europe, featuring cowboys, Indians, and choreographed shootouts for audiences that had never set foot on a plane. The spectacle was grand. Hundreds of horses, live bison, reenactments of stagecoach attacks, and battles against Native Americans, all staged in an open-air arena. Annie Oakley, the best sharpshooter in America, was the main star, breaking glass targets on horseback and impressing even Queen Victoria of England. The show attracted audiences of more than 20,000 people per performance. Hollywood did not yet exist, Buffalo Bill was already the entertainment industry, but here comes the part no one likes to talk about. The show used real Native Americans as extras, reenacting their own defeats for white audiences. Sitting Bull, the legendary Sioux chief who defeated Custer at the Battle of Little Bighorn, traveled with the show for a time. He accepted the job for the income, $50 a week, and for the chance to observe up close the society that was trying to destroy his people. The irony is brutal. The real Wild West was still ongoing when Buffalo Bill began selling the romanticized version of it. While real families lost everything in conflicts with ranchers and the government, the public applauded choreographed versions of those same tragedies. The show defined the image of the West for entire generations, and that image was almost entirely false. America began to believe its own propaganda before the history was even over. Fact number 6. The Earp brothers were more like gangsters than heroes of the law. Forget the heroic version of Wyatt Earp that movies had been selling for decades. The reality is that the Earps operated in a gray zone between law and crime that would make any modern mobster feel right at home. They were both the law and the disorder of Tombstone. Before Tombstone, Wyatt Earp had a record that was anything but heroic. In 1871, he was charged with horse theft in Arkansas. In the following decade, he worked as a bouncer in brothels, a professional gambler, and a debt collector, activities that frequently involved intimidation and violence. His brothers Virgil and Morgan were no different. The entire family operated as a clan that mixed public office with private business, always taking advantage of both. The famous gunfight at the OK Corral in October 1881 was not an act of justice. It was the climax of a territorial dispute between the Earps and the Clanton-McClory clan. Property, smuggling routes, and political control were at stake. 30 seconds of gunfire left 3 dead. Afterward, Wyatt led a vendetta ride, executing suspects without trial across Arizona. They called it justice. Today, we would call it something else. And here's the detail that changes everything. Wyatt Earp was never officially the sheriff of Tombstone. He ran for the position and lost the election. His brother Virgil was the marshal. Wyatt served as a deputy without formal appointment. The man Hollywood turned into the greatest symbol of law in the Wild West could not get elected sheriff. The legend was bigger than the man, and that says everything about how America builds its heroes. Fact number 7. The deadliest weapon in the Wild West did not fire bullets. It was disease. You can mention Billy the Kid, Jesse James, or any famous gunslinger. None of them came close to killing as many people as cholera, smallpox, and dysentery. Diseases were the true reaper of the American frontier. Silent, relentless, and completely democratic. Cholera was the most feared. It arrived through contaminated water, and on the frontier, all water was suspect. A healthy person in the morning could be dead by nightfall. Violent dehydration killed in hours. In the 1840s and 1850s, cholera outbreaks decimated entire wagon trains of pioneers on the Oregon Trail. It is estimated that between 20 and 30,000 people died of cholera on the trails to the west, more than in any armed conflict of the era. Smallpox was even more devastating for Native Americans. Entire tribes were wiped out by a disease against which they had no biological defense. In 1837, an outbreak in the upper Missouri region killed about 17,000 Mandans, reducing the tribe to fewer than 150 survivors. Some historians argue that contaminated blankets were intentionally distributed. The result is the same: entire populations erased from the map. And dysentery? It was so common, it became part of the routine. In mining towns, where hundreds of men lived crammed together without basic sanitation, the drinking water and the sewage water were frequently the same thing. Doctors of the time reported that for every man killed by a bullet in Tombstone, at least 5 died of intestinal disease. The frontier was not conquered by heroes with revolvers. It was conquered by those who survived the epidemics, and many did not survive. Tuberculosis was the slow killer. Doc Holliday, one of the most famous figures of the Wild West, suffered from it. A trained dentist from Philadelphia, he received the diagnosis at 20 and was told by doctors that he had months to live. He moved to the west, hoping the dry climate would help, and it did for a while. But the disease never let him go. He died in a sanatorium in Colorado, thin, weak, at 36. They say his last words were spoken while looking at his own bare feet. Funny, I always thought I would die with my boots on. What makes this even more shocking is that no one truly understood how diseases spread. Germ theory was only widely accepted at the end of the 19th century. On the frontier, people believed diseases came from bad air, from curses, or from divine punishment. Quarantine was something that simply did not exist. If you could pay the stagecoach fare, you got on, sick or not. A single infected passenger in St. Louis could kill an entire town in New Mexico in 2 weeks. Fact number 8. The fastest gunslinger in the Wild West was probably not who you imagine. When someone mentions a legendary gunfighter, most people think of Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, or Billy the Kid. But the most feared, most efficient, and most successful shooter on the American frontier was a black man who was born enslaved. His name was Bass Reeves. Bass Reeves was born enslaved in Arkansas in 1838. During the Civil War, he escaped to Indian Territory, where he learned to survive in the most dangerous lands in the country. He learned indigenous languages, knew every trail and every hideout in that region like no one else. In 1875, the federal government realized it needed someone who knew that territory, and chose Reeves as one of the first black marshals in American history. The numbers are impressive. In over 3 decades as a marshal, Reeves arrested more than 3,000 criminals. He killed 14 men in self-defense. It is said he was never hit by a bullet, even when facing entire gangs alone. He used disguises, dressing as a beggar, a preacher, a harmless old man, to get close to his targets before arresting them. His marksmanship was so legendary that outlaws simply surrendered when they heard his name. But here comes the part that hurts. When Hollywood decided to create a masked hero based on the story of a man who rode with an indigenous partner, a white horse, and a strict code of honor, they made him white. The Lone Ranger, the whitewashed copy of Bass Reeves, became an American icon. The real man died in January 1910 in Muskogee, Oklahoma, at 71 years old, virtually forgotten. America took his story, changed the skin color, and sold it as an original fiction. Fact number 9. Chinese immigrants built America and were kicked out as soon as they were done. If you look at the history of the transcontinental railroads that connected the Atlantic to the Pacific, you will find a detail nearly erased from the books. Most of the most dangerous work was done by Chinese workers. They hung dynamite off cliffs, dug tunnels through snow, and faced avalanches, almost always earning less than their white counterparts. The Central Pacific Railroad recruited more than 15,000 Chinese workers to build the most difficult stretch of the railroad, the passage through the Sierra Nevada. They worked in conditions that white men refused. They hung in wicker baskets on the edge of cliffs to drill rock and plant explosives. Hundreds died in explosions, cave-ins, and avalanches. Many never even had their names recorded. They were numbers on a payroll that paid half the salary of a white worker. When the tracks finally connected at Promontory Summit, Utah in May 1869, there was a national celebration. Photographs were taken, speeches were made, heroes were named. Not a single Chinese worker appears in the official photos. They were deliberately excluded from the moment they helped build. America celebrated the achievement and erased the builders. And then came the kick. Instead of recognition, the Chinese received the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, the first American law to ban immigration based on ethnicity. They could not become citizens, bring their families, or vote. In Rock Springs, Wyoming, 1885, white miners attacked a Chinese community. 28 dead, 79 homes destroyed. No one was convicted. They built a nation, and the nation pretended they never existed. Fact number 10. The first train robbery in history was the work of ex-Confederates who did not accept defeat. In October 1866, in rural Indiana, the Reno brothers did something no one had tried before. They robbed a moving train. The idea was simple and brilliant. A train was basically a giant safe on rails, crossing lawless territories, without an escort and without fast communication. The method was straightforward. They boarded at night, overpowered the crew, uncoupled the front cars, and told the engineer to keep going. Far from the station, they broke into the mail car and took everything. In the first robbery, they walked away with $13,000, equivalent to more than $400,000 today. The plan worked so well, it created an entire industry of crime on rails. The Reno brothers were not ordinary bandits. They were former Confederate soldiers who returned from the war without money, without land, and without prospects. For them, the train represented federal money, the government that had defeated them. Robbing trains was both crime and revenge. That feeling fueled an entire generation of outlaws. Jesse James, Butch Cassidy, and dozens of others would follow the same script for the next 30 years. The end of the Renos was as violent as their careers. In December 1868, a mob stormed the jail where Frank, William, and Simeon awaited trial. They broke open the cells and hanged all three without a court. No one was punished. Frontier justice had its own rules, and the main one was that there were no rules. The Renos invented the train robbery. America killed them before they could profit from the invention. Fact number 11. The entire Wild West era lasted only 30 years. It seems strange, but it is true. That period we imagine as an endless age of cowboys, outlaws, and lawless lands lasted, in practice, from the 1860s to the 1890s. 3 decades. Less than an adult lifetime. And yet, no other period in American history generated as many legends, as many movies, and as much mythology. What opened the Wild West was the Civil War. When it ended in 1865, thousands of former soldiers from both sides were left without jobs, without land, and without direction. The government offered land in the West through the Homestead Act. The California gold rush had already proven that fortunes could be made overnight. The result was a massive migration to territories where the law simply did not exist. The stage was set for chaos. What closed the Wild West was civilization. The railroads shortened distances. The telegraph enabled instant communication. Barbed wire, patented in 1874, fenced the open ranges and ended the cattle drives. And the law finally arrived. Federal marshals, courts, and the presence of the army turned lawless territories into states with constitutions. In 1890, the government officially declared that the frontier no longer existed. 30 years. In that time, Billy the Kid rose and fell. Jesse James lived and died. Wyatt Earp built and destroyed his reputation. Thousands of Native Americans lost their lands, and the railroad connected a continent. More history was compressed into those 3 decades than in entire centuries of other countries. And when it ended fast, like a match that burns bright and goes out. The Wild West lived briefly, but it lived loudly. Fact number 12. In some Wild West towns, brothels outnumbered saloons. Dodge City, Tombstone, Deadwood. When you think of those towns, you picture saloons packed with cowboys drinking whiskey. What the movies do not show is that in many of those towns, there were more brothels than bars. And that was no accident, it was pure economics. Think about the demographics. Towns like Dodge City had absurd ratios. For every woman, there were 12 men. There were cowboys passing through, miners, soldiers, merchants, lonely men with money in their pockets and weeks of isolation on their backs. Brothels were the most profitable business on the frontier. In Tombstone, in the early 1880s, there were more than 110 licensed establishments that included adult entertainment activities. The entire town had fewer than 4,000 residents. The women who worked in these establishments came from varied circumstances: widows, orphans, immigrants without means, formerly enslaved women. For many, there was no other option on the frontier. Some got rich. Mattie Silks, in Denver, built an empire and became one of the wealthiest people in the city. But the majority were not so lucky. Disease, violence, and addiction consumed these women in just a few years. Life expectancy was drastically lower than average. Deaths from laudanum overdose, the opium of the era, were so common they barely made the news. The frontier sold these women's bodies in life and forgot them in death. Hollywood preferred to show the smiling dance hall girl. The reality was infinitely more cruel. And there was the hypocrisy. The towns that profited from brothel taxes treated their workers as second-class citizens. They could not vote, could not own property in many territories, and when they died, they were buried in separate sections of the cemeteries. The money was accepted. The women who generated it were not. The frontier had a curious morality. It sinned from Monday to Saturday and repented on Sunday. Fact number 13. The ghost towns of the Wild West did not die slowly. They were abandoned overnight. When you hear ghost town, you imagine a gradual decline, houses emptying little by little over years. The reality was much more abrupt. Entire towns were born and died at the speed of a rumor about gold. The cycle was always the same. Someone discovered gold, silver, or another valuable mineral in a remote region. In weeks, the news spread, and hundreds of people converged on the spot. In months, a complete town appeared. Saloons, hotels, brothels, mining offices, even newspapers. Body, in California, went from 0 to 10,000 inhabitants in just a few years. It was one of the most violent towns in the West, averaging 1 murder per day at the height of the gold rush. But when the mineral ran out, the town died faster than it was born. The mines dried up, the miners left, the merchants closed their doors, and followed the next rumor of wealth. Entire families packed up what they could carry and departed in a matter of days. What was left behind told the story. Plates on the table, clothes in the closets, unfinished letters on desks, as if the entire town had been sucked up by an invisible hole. Centralia, Body, Calico, Rhyolite, the names pile up like gravestones. In Nevada alone, more than 600 towns were founded and abandoned between 1860 and 1900. Each one represented thousands of people who bet everything on a promise of wealth and left with nothing. The buildings that remain are wooden skeletons, monuments to the cruelest cycle of the frontier, the hope that builds and the reality that destroys. And here comes the macabre detail. Many ghost towns have cemeteries with more dead residents than they ever had living ones. In Bodie, the cemetery holds hundreds of graves, most of them young men killed by violence, accidents, or disease. The most honest ghost town in the Wild West is not the one with empty saloons. It is the cemetery. It tells the truth that the abandoned buildings prefer to hide. Not all ghost towns stayed ghosts. Some were reborn as tourist attractions, others were swallowed by the desert. Tombstone, which should have died when the mines flooded in 1882, survived by selling its own legend. Today, tourists pay to watch reenactments of the gunfight at the OK Corral on the very spot where real men actually died. The Wild West died, but its ghost learned to charge admission. In the end, the Wild West never truly ended. It just changed the setting. The duels left the holster and entered contracts. The land disputes became disputes over data, water, and oil. Yesterday's ghost towns are today's abandoned shopping malls. The gold rush became the cryptocurrency rush, and the frontier, on that lawless place where anyone could make a fortune or die trying, still exists. It just fits on a screen now,